I had been looking forward to Halloween all month. Each year, I made it a tradition to transform my front porch into a welcoming beacon for trick-or-treaters. I put out jack-o'-lanterns with gnarled, grinning faces, draped fake cobwebs over the porch railing, and set up a spooky soundtrack of eerie howls and ghostly whispers. The candy bowl was filled to the brim with chocolate bars, gummies, and sour candies of every kind. I like to think I was the house that all the neighborhood kids looked forward to visiting. The first knock came just after sunset, a small rap on the door that made me smile. I opened it to find a group of young children standing on my porch, their costumes a colorful blend of princesses, superheroes, and skeletons. I dropped generous handfuls of candy into their bags and listened to their cheerful chorus of thank you before they scampered off to the next house. I watched them for a moment, feeling that familiar warmth of nostalgia. This was what Halloween was all about: innocent fun, silly costumes, and sweet treats. More children came in waves, all dressed in various costumes, from the adorable to the classic. Witches with crooked hats, tiny vampires with plastic fangs, and even a dinosaur or two. I enjoyed seeing the creativity and the excitement in their eyes, savoring the spirit of the holiday. But as the night wore on, the nature of the trick-or-treaters began to shift. The children were replaced by older teenagers who were far too tall for their costumes. The first one that gave me a pause was a boy who looked about 17. He wore a cheap vampire costume, but there was something off about him. His pale face wasn't painted on. His eyes seemed to glow. He grinned at me, showing teeth that looked like real fangs instead of the plastic ones I would have expected. "Happy Halloween," I said, reaching into the candy bowl. He didn't say anything, just stared at me, his grin slowly fading into a blank expression. When I dropped a candy bar into his bag, he whispered, "You shouldn't have opened the door." My hand froze for a moment as I met his gaze. It was the tone of his voice, the eerie way he spoke, that sent a shiver down my spine. I forced a polite smile and watched him walk away, his footsteps making no sound on the pavement. I tried to shake off the unease, chalking it up to a teenager trying to be creepy. The knocks on the door continued, and each time I answered, it seemed the costumes grew stranger. There was a girl whose face was obscured by a mask that looked like a human face stitched together. It was too detailed, almost grotesquely lifelike. When I handed her candy, she tilted her head at me and asked, "How much would you pay for your life?" Her voice was soft, and the way she said it made my skin crawl. "What?" I stammered, not sure if I had heard her correctly. "Never mind," she said with a faint giggle, and then she turned and skipped down the walkway, her laughter echoing in the night air. I closed the door and told myself it was just Halloween. I took a deep breath. Some people really got into the spirit, and teenagers were always known for trying to scare people. At least around my neighborhood. That was the point of the night, wasn't it? Still, I couldn't help but feel unnerved by the way they looked at me, as if they weren't just playing a role. I tried to ignore the growing sense of dread and continued handing out candy. But then, things got even stranger. One knock was louder than the others, a heavy thud that rattled the door. When I opened it, I was greeted by a tall figure in a black robe. The robe was frayed, and the fabric seemed to ripple in the breeze, even though the air was still. The person wore a mask that resembled a gaping skull. But it wasn't the mask that unsettled me. It was the eyes. They were glowing a dim, sickly yellow, like two dying embers flickering deep within the hollow sockets. "Trick or treat," the figure said, in a voice that was too deep, almost guttural. Happy Halloween," I replied, dropping candy into the sack. The person didn't leave right away. They stood there, staring at me, the glow in their eyes pulsing slightly. It felt like they were looking right through me. I shifted uneasily on my feet. "I think that's enough candy for you," I said, attempting to sound lighthearted. The figure finally turned and walked away, but as they left, I thought I heard them whisper, "We'll be back." I shut the door quickly, my hands shaking. There was something wrong tonight. I glanced at the candy bowl. It was starting to look empty. I could feel a sense of relief at the idea that the night might be winding down. The sooner I could lock the doors and turn off the lights, the better. I was about to take down the decorations when another knock came. This one wasn't loud, but it was steady, persistent. I hesitated for a moment, then opened the door. The figure standing before me made my breath catch in my throat. It was another teenager, I thought, but the costume was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was a monstrous, grotesque form, covered in dark scales that seemed to shimmer in the porch light. The face, I don't even know if it was a mask. It looked so real, the skin wrinkled and twisted, with jagged teeth that jutted out from a mouth that seemed too wide. The eyes glowed a deep red, the way coals do in a dying fire. It was as if they were alive, burning with some terrible intent. I'm out of candy," I stammered, my voice trembling as I backed away slightly. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize I ran out." The creature tilted its head, just like the girl with the stitched mask had, and it continued to stare at me. There was a long silence. My mouth went dry, and I could hear my own heart beating in my ears. The thing didn't move, and it didn't say anything. It just kept looking at me with those horrific, glowing eyes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it turned and walked away without a word. But as it reached the end of the walkway, I could have sworn I heard it mutter, "You'll regret it." I slammed the door shut and locked it, my pulse racing. I felt a sudden urge to take down all the decorations, to turn off the lights and pretend I wasn't home. I pulled the jack-o'-lanterns inside, tore down the cobwebs, and turned off the spooky soundtrack that was still playing in the background. The house was quiet now, but my nerves were on edge. I sat on the couch, staring at the front door, half expecting another knock. My imagination was running wild, and every little creak and groan of the house made me jump. I tried to distract myself with the TV, but the noise was too jarring, too loud in the otherwise silent house. I turned it off, preferring the quiet, even though it wasn't any better. Then I heard it, soft, scratching sounds coming from the front door. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. It was faint but unmistakable, like fingernails dragging slowly across the wood. I forced myself to move, inching toward the door and peering through the peephole. There was nothing there, no one on the porch, no trick-or-treaters walking up the path, just darkness. I let out a shaky breath and backed away. Maybe it was a tree branch or a stray animal. I tried to convince myself of that, but deep down, I didn't believe it. The scratching continued intermittently, sometimes from the back of the house, other times from the sides. It was as if someone or something was circling the house. I made sure every door was locked, every window shut tight. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The sounds grew louder, turning into soft, barely audible whispers that seemed to come from just outside the walls. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear, but the whispers stopped the moment I tried to listen. Hours seemed to pass, and the noises didn't cease. At one point, I heard a soft thudding, as if something heavy had been dropped on the front porch. I crept toward the door, my heart racing, and looked through the peephole once more. Standing at the edge of the walkway was the dark, monstrous figure with the glowing eyes. It was watching the house, its eyes piercing the darkness like twin beacons of malevolence. I stepped back, my hands trembling uncontrollably. How was it still here? What did it want? Suddenly, the front doorknob rattled, and the front door seemed to press inward as if something was trying to force its way in. I stumbled back, grabbing the nearest object, a decorative bat that hung near the entryway. I held it like a weapon, though I knew it would be useless if the thing actually broke inside. The rattling stopped. In a moment later, there was a soft, mocking knock. I didn't answer. I didn't even breathe. I stood there, paralyzed, waiting for the next sound. But after what felt like an eternity, the noises faded away, leaving only the unsettling silence of the night. I didn't sleep at all that night. I stayed on the couch, my ears straining to catch any sound, my eyes fixed on the front door. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside made my skin crawl. I kept the decorative bat gripped tightly in my hand, even though I knew it was just a cheap Halloween prop, more for show than actual protection. The minutes seemed to stretch into hours, and the darkness outside the windows felt suffocating. I was too scared to even approach the curtains, afraid of what I might see peering in at me. I kept telling myself that morning would come soon, that the daylight would chase away whatever horrors had been haunting me, but the night seemed endless. I knew something had been there, something unnatural. Finally, just as the first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The night was over. I still didn't feel safe, but at least the oppressive darkness had lifted. Hope you enjoy that story, and I'll see you in the next one. See you on the flip side.